Hi everyone, it's Kurt again and here for another video, this time assessing reading. Again, our content comes from our textbook from Brown and Abiwikrama about language assessment. Okay, so let's jump in. This is the third of the 4 skills. This one is assessing reading, and this time the content's a little bit more than previous. So I'm going to try to go through it a little bit faster just so the video doesn't end up being too long. So a lot of examples. So when I'm going through the examples, I'm not going to cover like all the questions and answers. You can do that on your own. What I want you to do is try to think about what's going on in that type of question. Why do we ask it? What is the main purpose? What are the skills that are being used? Okay, so let's go. So the learning objectives are the same as they've been for the last 2. This time it's just about reading. Okay. So talking about the assessment of reading, it's not just about comprehension, right? And this is similar to listening in that you can't actually see the reading process happen. You can see the person doing the reading, but you can't actually see the cognitive processes. So in terms of what are they doing while they're reading, it's really hard to assess. All you can assess is their comprehension and the strategies that they used. You cannot actually assess the performance of reading. That's something that we cannot see. Okay, so in terms of genres of reading, let's just say of reading, not or, there's a lot. And, you know, as a teacher and as an assessor, should really keep this in mind. It shouldn't just be typical articles that you see in the textbook. It should be many, many different kinds so that students can really learn and also so you can assess. So we've got academic reading, we've got job-related reading. You can see a number of different choices in there. And we've also got personal reading. So look at them all. And I think it would be very beneficial for students to not only learn their reading through all of the different types of genres, but when you assess them as well. Just keep in mind that you never want to give them something new that they've never seen before. So if you've never read a comic book in class before, comic strip, for example, don't put that on an assessment. Let them learn it before, because remember, one of the keys of assessment is you're allowing students to activate their background knowledge. And so if they've never seen that type of genre before, maybe they won't be able to activate a lot of background knowledge. Okay, so I mentioned that here. So efficient readers must know what their purpose is for reading a text, and they need to know what are the strategies for accomplishing that purpose, and then how to retain the information. So that's why you need to practice the different types of genres in the classroom first before you assess them. Okay, micro and macro skills. Again, I'll quickly go through these. So here are the micro skills. You can pause the video and look in your textbook to look at them more specifically. Okay, there are 7 micro skills. And then for the macro skills, again, you can tell these are more top-down, more macro type, right? Okay, and then down to 14. You see in there the reading strategy, scanning and skimming. Those are 2 that we're also going to talk about in terms of assessment. Okay, so let's look at the strategies for reading comprehension. So here are strategies that we should be teaching and also we can test. So first of all, students should be able to identify their purpose for reading. They should apply spelling rules and conventions for bottom-up processing. They should use lexical analysis to determine meaning. They should guess at the meaning when they're unsure, and you need to teach them how to do that. Skim the text for gist and main ideas. Scan the text for specific information. These 2 things should be practiced, especially if you're going to test them on them later. Use silent reading for rapid processing. So if you're going to have students do skimming and scanning, of course, that would be silent reading as well. Use marginal notes. outlines, charts, or semantic maps to understand and retain information, distinguish between literal and implied meaning. We see that one every time. And use discourse markers to process relations. Okay, so now let's quickly go through the 4 types of reading. Okay, so one point though before we start is when you're talking about their actual reading performance, it really depends on the type of text, right? Because it's not like speaking, where speakers have certain skills. And when you watch someone speak, you can evaluate their performance. But as I mentioned, you can't evaluate someone's reading performance. You can't see it. And so what we really have to look at is their output based off of what they've read. And that really depends on the type of reading that you're asking them to do. Okay, so the first one is perceptive reading. These tasks involve attending to the components of larger stretches of discourse. So we're looking at letters, words, punctuation, and so on. And in this type of task, bottom-up processing is implied. Okay, the second is selective reading. Tasks are used to gauge a student's reading recognition of lexical, grammatical, discourse features in a short stretch of language. The stimuli can include sentences, short paragraphs, or simple charts and graphs. In this type of reading task or test item, brief responses are expected, brief, and you can use both bottom up and top down, but I might say there's more of a reliance on bottom up. Okay, the third one is interactive reading. Now you may see the word interactive and think, oh, so there's going to be some speaking. No, it doesn't mean like that. It means you are interacting with the text. Okay, so text samples are several paragraphs to 1 page long. Readers interact with the text, so they must negotiate meaning by using their schemata. Genres are typically anecdotes, short narratives and descriptions, excerpts from longer texts, questionnaires, memos, announcements, directions, recipes, and so on. So what we mean by this is they're going to read the text and they have to actually interact with it, give some kind of response. The focus here is to identify relevant features in the text with the goal of retaining that information. And in this type, top-down is more typical. And that brings us to the last one, which is extensive reading. Texts are much longer. We're looking at professional articles, essays, technical reports, short stories, books. And unless you're teaching the very last level of high school, probably you will never use these in your classrooms. Even in senior high school, I'm not sure if you will. Maybe short stories. I'm not sure if you'll be reading novels. I hope we get to that stage one time. Like my English classes when I was in high school, that's all we did was read novels. And then it was basically literature class. Okay, the purpose of assessment is to tap into their global understanding of the text. And top-down processing is necessary at this level. So we've got a table here. You can see 1 asterisk is moderate emphasis. And then when we have 2, it's strong emphasis. So if you're talking about the length of the test, okay, so perceptive will be short, selective will be maybe short or maybe medium. Interactive is definitely medium in length, and extensive will be long, more than a page, more than a couple pages, usually multiple pages, 10 pages or more, that kind. Okay, if we're talking about the focus of assessment, whether we're focusing on the grammar, the form, or the meaning, perceptive will be a strong focus on form. Selective also could be a little bit of the focus on meaning. In terms of interactive, you could have a little bit of a focus on form, but mostly on meaning, and then extensive would be all the way towards meaning only. So keep this in mind, okay? If you're designing assessments and you're trying to do like a selective task, you shouldn't be focused so much on meaning. You should be focused more on what we call grammar testing. And I'll show some examples after this. Same with if you ever get to the extensive level, you shouldn't be focused on grammatical issues at that point. I mean, in the questions that you ask, it should be all about the global meaning of the text, critical thinking type questions. Okay, and then if we're looking at the type of processing, so perceptive will be all bottom up, selective maybe a little bit of both, interactive possibly a little bottom up, but mostly top down, and then extensive would be top down. So, if you're not sure, go back and look at those micro and macro skills, because there's a strong correlation between macro and top down. Okay, moving on. So now we're looking at perceptive reading, and there's a lot of different examples here. So I'm going to go through them quite fast, okay? Because I'm going so fast this time, if you have questions, make sure you bring them to the classroom. So first kind is literacy tasks. This is the very, very beginning level. This is where you're recognizing the alphabet, capitalized lowercase letters, or actually, is it even a word? Punctuation, short, easy words, grapheme, phoneme, correspondences. Why these are called literacy tasks is because the learner is in the very beginning stages of becoming literate in the language. And so these tasks need to be very, very simple. So like this kind, it could be where they see a word and they have to copy it down. Like it's that simple. Okay, reading aloud, assessing whether they are reading the correct letters or words. This one is not about pronunciation. So when you ask them to read a sentence, if they say the word a little bit wrong, it doesn't matter. It's can they identify what the word is? And then written response. So this is just like reading aloud, but now they have to reproduce it in writing. So maybe they read a sentence and they have to write that sentence back down. And in this kind, like maybe you're asking them to copy a sentence, for example. This is actually something that's done in like grade 1, grade 2, where they have to copy by writing the words again, just to make sure that they can actually read it. However, you have to ask yourself, if they make a mistake, is the mistake because of their reading or is it because of their writing? And so you need to assess properly. Okay. And then we can have multiple choice, right? So just keep in mind when we're talking about multiple choice that multiple choice doesn't just mean choosing A, B, or C, or A, B, C, D. It could also be same or different, circle the answer, true, false, choose the correct letter, matching, and it could even be, read the sentence and touch the picture. Like there's so many different ways that multiple choice can be designed. Just usually we think about A, B, C, D. Okay, so here's some multiple choice examples at the perceptive reading level. Keep that in mind. So for this one is minimal pair distinction. You look at how simple this is. This is really elementary school type stuff. This is reading, not listening. So circle S for same or D for different, lead and let. So the difference here is between D and T, right? So that one will be different. But then number 2, bit and bit, they're the same. So you circle same. These are the type of tasks that native speakers do as well. I taught grade 1 before, and in the textbook, some of the reading assignments were just circle which one is an actual English word, because sometimes it would have numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4. And you have to circle, is that a word or not? Just to really, at the very, very basic level, are they able to process what English really is? Okay, you can have a grapheme recognition task. So for example, circle the odd item, the one that doesn't belong. But you look at the prompt here. Test takers read. Circle the odd item. Now, if you're really doing this type of task, it means their ability is their proficiency is low. I doubt they could read that prompt. So probably you would need to read the instructions to them and maybe even give an example first so that they could figure it out. Okay. So obviously you can see the one word that's different in each one. Okay, so Still at perceptive reading, and now we're looking at picture cued items. So you can see these are quite simple, right? You look at the picture, then read the word on each card and point to the object. So this is really reading only, right? This is a great way without having to have them speak or write. So I read the word cat, I touch the cat, and obviously when you're doing this test, somebody needs to be there. The test giver, the administrator, of course, you need to sit with the student. So that might not be very practical, but it's definitely valid because they're reading and showing you what they've read. Okay, the next one is also picture cued, but this one would be sentence identification. Please ignore the cat clock chair on there. It's the only picture that the book had, but just imagine you're still looking at the same picture without the 3 words at the bottom. Instead, what you see are the 2 sentences. The man is reading a book. So the student reads that sentence, and then again, they touch the man. So instead of just a simple word, give them a sentence. Okay, so I think this type, even though it's very basic, actually it can be a lot higher than grade 1, right? Maybe even late elementary school, this could be a relevant one. Now, instead of pointing, if you want it to be more practical, you do some kind of matching or circling. Okay, the next one could be picture cued true false. Again, please ignore the cat clock chair at the bottom of the picture. So test takers read the pencils are under the table, true false. Okay, and on and on. See lots of perceptive examples here. The next one will be matching. So again, they look at the picture. Please ignore cat clock chair at the bottom again. And then the words are on the side and they have to write the letter down. Again, this one may be more practical for the teacher because you don't have to sit there and watch them. However, as you know, once you do this type, now students are able to guess. So you can't know 100% for sure if they really knew all 5. It's possible they knew 3 and then guessed on the other 2. And that is a 50-50 guess. So they went from 60% correct for sure to maybe 100%. And that's a big difference in score. So if you want to avoid this type of thing, you have some extra letters in there. Like you have 5 questions, but maybe you have 7 or 8 letters. Now, if they're only grade 1, it's okay. You're not trying to kill them on a test, right? But if you really want to know whether they can read or not, that's something you can do. Okay, and then we also have this type where they see and then choose the correct item. So they read the word rectangle and then they have to circle or whatever you want them to do. Which one is the rectangle? Okay, so let's move on to selective reading now. So these tasks include what we typically call grammar and vocabulary assessment. So when you take your tests, junior, senior high school, even though a lot of them are called reading test items, right? They're still really just assessing grammar and vocabulary. And the way to justify this is for all 4 of these skills. You know I'm not the grammar focused type guy. But of course, it's important. You need to have skills in grammar and vocabulary. And for all 4 of them, right? Listening, reading, writing, speaking. You need to use the language appropriately. And so for each one, of course, we can still test the grammar because we need to know that in terms of reading, can you read it properly? Do you know what's correct English? Okay, so as I mentioned, then all 4 of these skills, we can assess grammar and vocabulary as well, just to know a student's proficiency. So we will do this at the selective reading level, not so much at the interactive or extensive. Okay, so you know these type of questions. I'm not going to talk too much. As we know, when you're doing multiple choice, the only issue here is that they're not contextualized, and you have to be very careful about how you design it. I'm not going to review that because we already talked about it, but you know that you have to be careful so that they're not able to guess, and it's not too easy. And there's not more than one answer, right? All of those things we talked about before. And remember, just because you get those questions from some book designer or some other way, that doesn't mean they're good questions. So I hope at the very least when you become teachers that you evaluate these questions first before you give them to your students. And I hope you can hear Kurt's voice in the back of your head saying, evaluate those distractors and make sure they're okay. Are there any ambiguities? Is it vague? Are there two correct answers? Don't forget that your students are very clever. And if they can make it correct, then maybe it is correct. Okay. Moving on. One thing you can do there's some formatting problems, sorry. One thing you can do to contextualize it a little bit is to make it like a conversation type question, right? Like at least they see two people talking, so it's a little bit more contextualized. Okay, but same thing, you're choosing the correct word. Okay, and then you can do the close type for vocabulary and grammar that you've all done. Again, if you're designing these on your own, be very, very careful. Okay, and we can also use multiple close contextual. Now, these are a little different. This one is not contextualized in that the reason it's not is that every sentence, you don't need to depend on the next or previous sentence to answer the question. So look at number one. I've lived in the United States 3 years. I can answer that one just by reading that sentence. I could skip that sentence and go right to number 22. I live in Costa Rica. Okay? I don't need to look at the previous one because look at the answers. I used to, I was, live. I don't need to look at 21 or 23 or 24. So this is not contextualized. In this one, you have to understand the paragraph in order to get it correct. Watch. He showed his suitcase to me, but it wasn't big enough to fit all of his clothes. So I gave him my suitcase, which was larger or smaller. So if I skip 29 and 30 and go right to 31, actually I cannot guess the answer. So I need to read the whole paragraph. That's why this one is contextualized. Okay, then we could do vocabulary matching. Of course, this is just basic vocabulary assessment, but as I said, it's considered reading because, well, you need vocabulary for reading. And the input is all reading, it's not listening. So this could still be considered selective reading. Okay, then we can have fill in vocabulary. Now the words are down at the bottom. Use the word to complete the sentences. And we can also have editing tasks. Now, it looks better in the book because in the book they've got the sentence all out and then underneath each word is a letter A, B, C, D. Now, these are pretty good because this is a real authentic skill. And one way to test a student's English proficiency is to have them do some editing because you can show what they know. But even more importantly is they can learn while taking the test. Because if they find an answer that's wrong and they choose it, like, okay, let's look at the first one. The abrasively action of the wind wears away soft layers of rock. Okay, let's assume that I choose abrasively. To me, it just seems wrong. And later when I get the test back from the teacher, I see that I was right. I got it wrong. And so I know, okay, the abrasively action. Oh, right. Action is a noun. Abrasively is an adverb. Adverbs don't describe nouns. You've just cemented that knowledge inside the student's brain. However, if they circle wears, because they feel like it shouldn't have an S on the verb, but they get it back and it's wrong. Now they realize their knowledge is incorrect, and so they can learn from that. Then next time that they edit their own work, if they're really focused and they are noticing, they will look for that in their own editing. So this is a really useful type of task. And again, they can learn something from the test. So it's not just a test, it becomes something that's a little bit more authentic. Okay, next one is multiple choice picture cued. So here's one where they have to read it. And there's actually a whole passage that goes with this. It says test takers read a 3-paragraph passage. One sentence is during at least 3/4 of the year. The Arctic is frozen. Click on the chart that shows the amount of years. So 3/4. So they have to choose the right picture, of course, which is C. Okay. And then you can also have diagram labeling. Now this one is about, so these are the different types of picture cued tasks, right? So let me go back for a second. Sorry, this one is just some kind of multiple choice and it's based on the reading. This one is different in that they're reading instructions or definitions and then labeling the diagram. This one's more challenging, but for me, this is more authentic because that's what people do. They buy something and they read the instructions. They figure out how something works. So if they've never really read a bicycle manual before, or, they really need to use the graphic to help them understand. And that's a real life skill, right? Using graphics to help you understand the meaning. So this is very authentic as well. So you can see down below, number 1, wire supports extending from the hub of a wheel to its perimeter. So you can go through this one and see if maybe you can figure it out on your own. Okay, test yourself. I'll give you the answers later. Maybe the answers are in the textbook, I'm not sure. Okay, and then we can also have sentence completion tasks. These are gap filling. So, these will be more challenging, and if you try something like this, of course, it's more of an integrated item, right? Because now they're writing as well. And you have to think about how you're going to score it. Are you going to score the grammar, the meaning, both? How many points are you going to put on each one? So for example, doctor, what should I do if I get sick? It is best to stay home. And now it's very open here, right? There's not just one correct answer. Get some rest. Get rest. What if I say get rest? Or what if I say something a little bit wrong? Are you going to deduct points? You should really think about that beforehand and just ask yourself, what are you assessing? Are you assessing reading comprehension? Then maybe you shouldn't punish them too much for bad language. Are you assessing both? Is this an integrated task? Then you care more about the form. Okay. Now we're moving on to interactive reading. And they spend a lot of time talking about closed tasks in here. So I want to talk a little bit about this. And I think we're going to spend some time in class as well. So closed tests used to be used as a proficiency test. And the argument was that if you're able to use the text with words missing and recreate it, that proves that you are proficient in a language. And they did a lot of research to prove it. However, today we don't totally agree with that. Like, it used to be used for native speakers as well. But it is still a useful assessment type. But let me break it down and show you a couple of things you should consider if you're going to use them. Okay, so the theory is a sentence with a word left out should have enough context that a reader can close the gap with a calculated guess by using their linguistic expectancies, which is called your formal schemata, and your background knowledge, that's your content schemata, and then some strategic competence. So this is some higher order processing in your brain. When you do a closed task, it should be a minimum of 2 paragraphs in length. Okay, so let me talk about them. There's 2 types if you're making your own closed test. The first is called a fixed ratio deletion, which means you take a text and you delete every 7 words, plus or minus 2. Now, there are some words that you can't delete because maybe if you take that word out, it's impossible for them to guess. Like, for example, let's say it's talking about someone who invented something. So let's say the telephone. Okay. So in your text, it says the telephone was invented by blank. But if you don't know who invented the telephone, there's just no way for you to answer that. So you can't delete that one. You have to choose the word after or the word before. Usually names and that type of specific information, you just can't. You have to be able to get the answer from reading the text. Okay. in this type, it's random. So what you're doing is if the text is long enough, you will have nouns, you'll have verbs, you'll have prepositions, some grammatical words, some modal verbs. You just get all kinds of different choices, and it's random. But if you really want to focus on a specific grammatical function or particular vocabulary, then you can do the rational deletion. And that means you delete the words you want based on what you're teaching in class. Both have their pros, both have their cons. It depends what you're trying to do. If you just want to assess their reading ability, then you can try fixed ratio. But if you want to focus on specific form, then go with rational deletion. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part is scoring. How are you going to score it? Now, there's two ways, and you can think about this and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe in Taiwan that most teachers use the exact word scoring, and that's probably because they use rational deletion and they want you to choose the right word. So in this type, you have to use the original word from the text. Okay, now I hope you can see some problems with this one, but if not, I'll show you an example in a minute. The other one is appropriate word scoring. Any word that's grammatically correct and makes sense should be acceptable. Okay, so from a teacher's point of view, I can see why you will use exact word scoring, because if you're unsure about the answer the student gave, like is it correct or not, I'm not 100% sure, especially for some really high proficient students, then exact word scoring may be troublesome for you and it may take you a lot of time. You might have to look a lot of answers up. Appropriate word scoring will be hard for you. Exact word will be easy. It's not the exact word, it's wrong. But the problem with that is if your student makes it correct with a different answer and then you mark it wrong, I feel like that's not exactly fair to the learner, because you're testing their reading comprehension. They put a word in that works and you mark it wrong because that's not the exact word. But how are they supposed to know what the exact word is? So I'm not a huge fan of exact word scoring. I feel like it's not very fair for students. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of teachers will do it that way. Okay, so here's two examples, okay? So the first one is fixed ration deletion, okay? So you can see that the choices are different. So let's see if I can do it. I don't have the answers here. The recognition that one's feelings of something and unhappiness can coexist, much like and hate. Okay, so it looks like we're doing love and hate. So I would say happiness and unhappiness. Okay. Can coexist much like love and hate in a close relationship. Offer valuable clues. Okay, so see here, which offer valuable clues. That offer valuable clues. See, I already have two that I can think of off the top of my head. So what if I choose the wrong one? Then it's incorrect. Okay, and then look at number 4, on how to live a happier life. Lead a happier life. Create? I don't know. But there's a few choices here. Again, if I choose live and you want lead, and now I'm wrong, I think that's unfair. Okay, then down below is the rational deletion. So this one, the teacher just wants to test prepositions and conjunctions. Okay, so the recognition that one's feelings, again, of or on, both work here. Of happiness, on happiness, and unhappiness can coexist much like love and hate in a close relation. In a close relation, may offer valuable clues on how to lead. Okay, so you can see, even me, while I'm taking this, I may come up with a few different choices just off the top of my head. So your students would too. Okay. The next one is everybody's favorite. These are all of our standardized testing reading items. So these are the impromptu reading plus comprehension questions. Now, of course, the comprehension can be done in many different ways, but this is when we use a comprehension passage. I didn't put them all in here, but you know how these go. You've done them a lot. The most important part, though, is that in this passage, It's 250 words. There are 10 total questions. I only have 6 here. The others are in the book. It covers a comprehension of all of these features: main idea, expressions, idioms, phrases, and context, inference, grammatical features, detail, excluding facts that are not written, supporting ideas, and vocabulary in context. It's all in there to be assessed. So actually, it's really a useful text in which students can be assessed on their reading comprehension. Okay, then of course, if you want it to be more authentic and more meaningful, you can have open-ended questions like the 5 that are on the slide. Just keep in mind that once you do this, you have to be more aware of how you're going to score them, right? And this is just my opinion. Since you are testing reading comprehension at this stage, your focus on form should be very minimal, if at all, because you're not testing their grammar. You're testing their reading comprehension, and you're not testing their writing. Some students are just not good at writing. They forget their capital letters, they forget periods, they don't know where to put commas in, but maybe they totally understand. And so you should really think about this. It's not a bad idea to have a little bit of the answer based on their form, but in all honesty, it should be mostly on the comprehension of the task. Because if it's multiple choice, there's no focus on grammar, right? When you're doing this type, it should be coming from the text. So why, when I change it to short answer writing, all of a sudden now you care about my grammar? So just make sure you know what you're assessing. Okay, and then we can do editing again, this time of a longer text. So before it was just sentence at the most, and now we've got like a full paragraph or maybe even a full page. Same thing. This is a very authentic, contextualized task because this is a real life skill. Okay, we can also have them do scanning. So remember, scanning means looking for some specific information inside the text. Now, the idea of scanning means that you do it quickly. You're able to find information quickly, so they should be assessed based on time. If you give them 30 minutes to find one piece of information, it's not really scanning anymore, is it? So somehow you have to design it in a way where, of course, if it's computerized test, you can find out how long it took them. Maybe they get bonus points for doing it very fast. If it's in the classroom, perhaps they can only look at it for a certain amount of time, or the whole test of scanning. Maybe they only have 5 minutes to complete all the questions. I'm not sure what the best way is to do this, but you have to consider time. Okay, another type is sequencing. So this is a really good classroom task as well as a testing item. I want you to pause it if you haven't done this already and put these in order, and then see if you can find any ambiguities, or see if you can make it work in more than one way. Okay, but basically you're putting the sentences in order. Now, what I want you to, I'm sure you've done this type before, I don't want to talk about it too much, but what I want to show is, you notice the format here. There's no capital letters, there's no punctuation. So it's really about the students taking the information and putting it into an order that makes sense. In the lower levels, we'll probably put periods and capital letters on to help them. But of course, this way is more meaningful because they're just taking information and recreating a story. Okay, so hopefully you already did it by yourself. Here's my answers. This is the answer that I chose. So Peter looked outside. The street was in total darkness and it seemed deserted. He thought he heard someone whistling. He recognized the tune because it was the one he and Richard had learned at school. It was called The Last Waltz. In the textbook, though, they mentioned that actually you could also go like this. Peter looked outside. He thought he heard someone whistling. So do the tune part first, and then the street was in total darkness would be at the end. So there's a little bit of ambiguity here, and as a teacher, if you're going to design these things, you have to not only think about what you think is a correct answer, but you have to critically look at it and think, is there more than one correct answer? And for this is okay. Just make sure that you're aware of it, and so you don't penalize the students when they're in fact correct as well. Okay. Another type of interactive reading is information transfer. So doing like reading charts, maps, graphs, diagrams. So basically they have to be able to comprehend the material and then pass that information along, which usually in this type of test, they read it and then they write it down in the appropriate place. So this type, the media is the graphics, assumes the reader's appropriate schemata for interpreting them, and they're accompanied by oral or written discourse. So what that means is when you look at a high-speed rail schedule, I'm assuming that your schemata already has that background knowledge, that you are able to look at a high-speed rail schedule and be able to answer questions about it. So of course you have to make sure that they have the background knowledge to deal with this type, or it'll be very challenging. Okay, so when they get a graphic, a chart, a map, whatever, to comprehend them, they must be able to comprehend specific conventions of the type of graphic. So they've seen it before. They know that it's a manual. They know that it's a map. They know that it's a seating chart, whatever it is. They have to be able to comprehend labels, headings, numbers, symbols. They have to be able to comprehend the possible relations among the elements of the graphic. And they have to make inferences that are not presented overtly. So again, this is something that you don't want to just throw on a test at the end of the semester. They need practice. They need to learn them. Okay, so here's an example of assessing interpretation. So for example, there's no picture here. You just have to kind of imagine them. So you can read a graphic and answer simple, direct questions. So for example, there's a picture of a map. And the question is, where's the post office? And you need to either say it or write it. So you see, this type of reading comprehension is not just reading the words, but it's also reading the graphic. You see a picture of a family tree. Who's Tony's great-grandfather? You see a statistical table. What does p is less than 0.05 mean? Whatever class you're doing. Or you see a diagram of a steam engine. Label the parts, just like the bicycle one we saw before. Okay, and that brings us to extensive reading. Now, extensive reading, as I mentioned before, is mostly top-down processing. Because the text is so long, it's unlikely to be carried out in a typical class setting. Like, you're not going to ask your students to read a whole novel in class, right? And this type of assessment, it typically includes writing. The response is going to be written unless you're asked to give a speech. That's possible too. So a couple things to show here. You can do skimming tasks as well with these type. So ask students to skim through and tell you these things. So again, this will be time. This is a way that you could like have a short novel and you could give them these questions as a test in a 30-minute test or something. What's the main idea? What's the author's purpose? What kind of writing is it? What type of writing is it? Is it expository, narrative? So you see, you're testing all of the conventions of literature or of writing. So what type is it? What's the genre? Author's purpose? How easy or difficult do you think it will be, and why? What do you think you'll learn from this text? And that's something that you could actually do in the classroom. I think this is a very, very good task to do with your students. Okay, and last one, not bad, 43 minutes. I was a little scared I could take this one for like an hour or so. The last two types you could do are summarizing and responding, and note-taking and outlining. So these are more authentic tasks. Again, probably they would need to be some kind of take-home assignment. And I think these are kind of self-explanatory, right? But the most important thing to note about these two is how are you going to score them? And there's no right or wrong answer, but it should be valid based on what you're asking them to do. So when you ask them to summarize or ask them to respond, is it mostly on the meaning? Is it the content? What is it that you are you just assessing their ability to summarize? And it should be carefully planned out. Okay, that's it, everybody. Have a fantastic weekend, and I will see all of you next time. Bye-bye.